4 people are strapped inside a metal capsule the size of a small SUV, moving at 25,000 miles per hour toward a planet they left 10 days ago. The seat harness is so tight that breathing feels like a privilege. There are no windows facing the direction they're traveling. There is no way to see what's coming. All they have is the vibration building in the frame around them, a sound that starts as a hum and grows into something that feels less like physics and more like a warning. And then, in the span of a single second, the air outside the capsule catches fire. Not the fire of a campsite or a building or even a rocket engine. Something else entirely. Something the human vocabulary was not built to contain. The air outside the thin metal shell keeping them alive reaches a temperature that is, by every measurable standard of physics, hotter than the surface of the sun. Twice as hot. And there is nowhere to go. This is not a disaster. This is the plan. On April 10th, 2026, 4 human beings strapped inside a capsule called Integrity hit the Earth's atmosphere, returning from the moon at 25,000 miles per hour. What happened in the next 8 minutes is one of the most extreme physical events ever deliberately engineered by the human species, and almost nobody talked about what it actually meant. Not in terms of policy, not in terms of history, in terms of physics, in terms of what the universe was doing to 4 living bodies, while the world watched parachutes open over the Pacific and called it beautiful. This is what actually happened. The moon is 250,000 miles away. That's the distance Artemis 2 had just crossed before the crew pointed Integrity back toward Earth. And the problem with returning from that far is one of the most brutal equations in nature. Every mile per hour of velocity you carry through space has to go somewhere when you re-enter an atmosphere. You can't just stop. You can't brake against nothing. The universe doesn't offer off-ramps. The only tool available to a spacecraft returning from the moon is the atmosphere itself, a column of gas that thickens the deeper you push into it, creating friction, and that friction generates heat. Not metaphorical heat, not uncomfortable heat. Heat that transforms the air around the capsule into something that no longer behaves like air at all. But here's the problem. At 25,000 miles per hour, the capsule isn't just moving through air, it's compressing it, instantly, violently. The molecules of the atmosphere have no time to move out of the way. They get stacked in front of the descending capsule like an invisible wall. And when you compress a gas that fast, something happens that most people never think about. The temperature spikes, not at the surface of the spacecraft, in the air itself. The shock wave enveloping Integrity during re-entry generated air temperatures exceeding 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The surface of the sun is roughly 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The air around Artemis 2 was nearly twice that. Not the spacecraft, the air. The invisible medium that surrounds us every second of our lives, the thing we breathe without thinking, the thing that was supposed to slow the capsule down, became, for those 8 minutes, one of the most extreme thermal environments that has ever existed in proximity to a living human being. And inside that capsule, 4 people were still breathing. From Earth, it looked almost serene. A bright streak across the pre-dawn sky, the kind of image that gets shared on social media with captions about wonder and human achievement. A golden trail of light arcing gracefully over the Pacific Ocean as the sun was still deciding whether to rise. Beautiful, controlled, like something out of a science fiction film where everything works out in the end. But something was wrong. That streak of light wasn't fire the way fire normally works, it was plasma. When air gets hot enough, and 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit is hot enough by any definition that exists, the molecules stop being molecules. The electrons rip away from their atoms. The gas stops being a gas and becomes a 4th state of matter that has no name in everyday language because everyday language was never designed for a situation like this. The capsule was not descending through air. It was descending through ionized matter, through a sheath of electrically charged particles so dense and so energetic that they did something else the news coverage never quite explained. They severed all communication between the crew and mission control. For 13 minutes, the world went silent. NASA's screens showed nothing. The tracking stations received nothing. The 4 astronauts inside Integrity, Commander Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen, were completely alone inside a plasma fireball, traveling faster than a bullet, surrounded by temperatures that make the surface of the sun look temperate, with no ability to call for help and no guarantee that the single layer of material standing between them and all of that was going to hold. And this is where things change. That single layer of material has a name. It's called a heat shield. And the heat shield on Integrity had a secret that NASA had known about for over 3 years before they put 4 human lives behind it. During Artemis 1, the uncrewed test flight in 2022, engineers recovered the capsule and found something that made laboratories go quiet. The heat shield had failed. Not completely, not catastrophically. But in more than 100 locations across its surface, the ablative material, the stuff designed to slowly char and burn away, carrying the thermal energy with it so the crew compartment stays survivable, had cracked, had sheared off in chunks, had behaved in ways that no computer model had predicted and no test had warned them about. The heat shield had experienced a pressure problem from the inside. Gases generated deep within the material during reentry couldn't escape through the outer layer, so they built up, and then they blew out, ripping away pieces of the only barrier between the crew and 18,000 degrees of plasma. But it gets worse. The heat shield on Artemis 2 was the same design. Identical materials, the same formulation of AV-coat that had already shown it could fail. NASA had ordered a new design for future missions, but the shield on Integrity was already installed, already certified, already attached to the bottom of the capsule that 4 astronauts were now sitting in. To replace it would have delayed the mission by 18 months or more. So they made a different decision. They modified the re-entry trajectory instead. Changed the angle of descent, adjusted the skip, the way the capsule briefly dips into the atmosphere, climbs back out, then commits to final descent, to keep the heat shield breathing throughout, to prevent the pressure buildup that caused the chunks to blow off Artemis 1. They ran simulations. They tested samples in arc jet facilities capable of recreating a fraction of the thermal conditions. They analyzed the failure. They believed they understood it. One former NASA astronaut and engineer publicly, loudly, on the record, said they did not. That the root cause was not fully understood. That flying 4 humans on that heat shield was a mistake. That they were guessing. NASA flew anyway, but that's not even the worst part. During those 13 minutes of blackout, as Integrity descended through its plasma sheath at velocities that would carry a passenger jet from New York to London in 9 minutes, the crew was experiencing something that the human body was never designed to endure. The G-forces of re-entry, the crushing deceleration as 25,000 miles per hour was scrubbed down to something parachutes could handle, pressed into their chests with a weight that turned every breath into work. The vehicle was oscillating, controlled by computer systems making thousands of micro-adjustments per second to manage the lift forces keeping the descent survivable. One miscalculation, one sensor failure, one unexpected behavior from a heat shield that had already surprised its engineers once before, and the plasma comes in. And the 13 minutes become permanent. The parachutes opened. 11 of them, in sequence, slowing the capsule from supersonic to survivable in a series of jolts that the crew later described as violent and beautiful at the same time. The USS John P. Murtha was waiting in the Pacific. The world watched the 3 main chutes blossom against a pale sky and exhaled. Recovery swimmers reached the bobbing capsule. The hatch opened. 4 human beings emerged, intact, into the morning air. There is something that doesn't get said about what Artemis 2 actually was. We talk about the records. Farthest humans ever traveled from Earth, 252,000 miles, breaking a record set during Apollo 13 more than 50 years ago. First woman, first black astronaut, first Canadian beyond low Earth orbit. Historic, groundbreaking. All of that is true and all of that matters. But what Artemis 2 also was, is this. 4 people who agreed to sit behind a heat shield with a known failure history, inside a plasma environment twice as hot as the sun, communicating with no one, moving faster than any human being had moved in over half a century, betting their lives on a trajectory adjustment and a belief that the root cause was understood well enough. Not certain. Believed. There is a difference between those two words that is the size of 18,000 degrees and 13 minutes of silence. The universe does not grade on effort. It does not reward confidence or budget or careful planning with survival. It gives you physics. Immutable, indifferent, ancient physics. And for 8 minutes over the Pacific Ocean, on the morning of April 10th, 2026, 4 human beings went to the edge of what physics permits a living body to survive, wrapped in a shell of charring material and engineered mathematics, and came back. Not because the universe relented, because the math held, this time.